In 1908, a Russian scientist named Elie Mechnikov stood before the Nobel Committee and made an argument that should have changed medicine forever. Most of what we call aging, the fatigue that accumulates in the bones, the immunity that blunts and slows, the inflammation that settles into joints and never quite leaves most of it, he said, begins not in the heart, not in the genes, but in the gut. And the key to slowing its progression wasn't a drug. It wasn't a supplement. It was something traditional mountain communities in the Caucasus had been doing every single day for thousands of years without any scientific framework to explain why it worked. They were fermenting their drinks. The medical establishment of 1908 largely moved on. There were more profitable things to develop, and somewhere between that moment and now, the living drinks that traditional cultures around the world had used to rebuild digestion, get inflammation, and restore strength after illness quietly disappeared from American kitchens. They were replaced by processed beverages designed for shelf stability, not for the human body. Today we bring them back. We're counting down 13 fermented drinks that ancient civilizations protected, traditional healers prescribed, and modern researchers are now beginning to understand at the molecular level. Stay with us through number 7, because the story attached to that entry involves a drink so nutritionally dense that for over 1,000 years it was given specifically to people too ill to eat. And pay close attention to number 1. Most people reading this have had the main ingredient sitting in their kitchen for years and have never once thought of it this way. Number 13. Shrub colonial drinking vinegar. Before every main meal in colonial American households, there was a ritual so ordinary that most families performed it without thinking about it as health practice at all. A small cup of something tart and fruit-forward, consumed before the food arrived. That prepared the digestive system for what was coming. It was called a shrub, and the fact that it disappeared from American tables at almost precisely the same time that chronic digestive complaints became one of the most commonly reported health issues in the country is a connection worth examining carefully. A shrub is not vinegar, in the way most people think of vinegar. It is a living infusion, fresh or dried fruit, steeped in raw apple cider vinegar for 5 to 7 days until the berry fully surrenders its compounds into the acid base, then strained and sweetened lightly with raw honey before being diluted into cold water and consumed before meals. Colonial households kept elderberry, blackberry, and raspberry shrubs as a matter of seasonal preparation, the same way they kept root vegetables in the cellar and dried herbs in the rafters. It was food infrastructure. What those families were observing without scientific language was the effect of acetic acid on the digestive environment. Low stomach acid, a condition now recognized by gastroenterologists as hypochlorhydria, is one of the primary contributors to the bloating, uncomfortable fullness after meals, and persistent indigestion that many adults over 60 manage with antacids. What most people don't know is that antacids suppress stomach acid further, which progressively worsens the underlying problem they're intended to address. The acetic acid in drinking vinegar works in the opposite direction, stimulating the stomach's natural acid production, supporting the enzymatic cascade that proper digestion depends on. The phenolic compounds in elderberries and blackberries, anthocyanins, flavonoids, quercetin, are preserved rather than destroyed by the vinegar infusion process, a key distinction from heat-processed berry preparations. To make a blackberry shrub, combine 1 cup of fresh or frozen blackberries with 1 cup of raw apple cider vinegar in a sealed glass jar. Refrigerate for 5 to 7 days, shaking daily. Strain and press the berries to extract every drop of liquid. Stir in a 1/4 cup of raw honey until dissolved. This concentrated syrup keeps refrigerated for several months. To serve, add 1 to 2 tablespoons to a glass of cold, sparkling, or still water, and drink 10 minutes before your largest meal of the day. Colonial physicians didn't have randomized controlled trials. They had generations of dinner tables and healthy family members. The research is now beginning to examine precisely why those dinner tables worked the way they did. Number 12. Fermented elderberry drink. Appalachian grandmothers fermented elderberries every autumn without exception. Not as a health project. As winter preparation, the same preparation their mothers had made and their mothers before them carried forward, because they had watched it work across enough generations of family illness and hard winters to trust it without needing an explanation. What those women understood through observation. Researchers have now studied in controlled settings. Elderberries contain a class of compounds called anthocyanins and specific flavonoids, including isohamnitin and kaempferol, that have been studied for their effects on immune signaling. Laboratory research has found that certain elderberry fractions may interfere with the ability of respiratory viruses to bind to healthy cells. A mechanism distinct from simply boosting immunity in the general way that phrase is often used. These findings are promising, and researchers note they require continued clinical investigation, but the direction of the evidence has been consistent enough to sustain serious scientific interest across decades of study. What fermentation adds to elderberry goes beyond what any bottled elderberry syrup can deliver. The cooking and fermentation process transforms the berry's cellular structure. Releasing its active compounds in forms the body may absorb considerably more readily than heat-processed preparations. The beneficial bacteria produced during fermentation add a probiotic dimension live cultures supporting gut diversity that commercial elderberry products, which are heat-stabilized and contain no living cultures, simply cannot replicate. One critical safety note before the preparation details: raw elderberries contain cyanogenic glycosides, compounds that cause significant nausea and vomiting. They must always be cooked or properly fermented before consumption. The process described below accomplishes both. To make fermented elderberry drink, simmer 2 cups of fresh or dried elderberries in 4 cups of water for 20 minutes. Cool completely to room temperature. Strain, pressing berries firmly to extract all liquid. Add 2 tablespoons of raw honey and 2 tablespoons of active water, kefir liquid or liquid whey, from fresh kefir as a starter culture. Pour into a clean glass jar. Cover with a breathable cloth secured with a rubber band, and leave at room temperature for 2 to 3 days until the liquid becomes gently fizzy and pleasantly tart. Refrigerate and consume 2 to 3 ounces daily through autumn and winter. The Appalachian grandmothers didn't have immunology textbook. They had root cellars and sick children and results they could see. That combination, it turns out, is its own form of clinical evidence. Number 11. Rejuvelac. In the 1960s, a woman named Anne Wigmore was told by her physicians that her degenerative condition had no meaningful path forward and that she should prepare for a life of progressive decline. She refused. She returned instead to the traditional food practices she had watched her Lithuanian grandmother perform throughout her childhood, fermenting sprouted grains into a simple, cloudy drink and consuming it daily alongside raw plant foods. Within months, her condition improved dramatically enough that her physicians described the change as unexpected. She spent the rest of her life teaching what she had discovered in the most ordinary kitchen terms she could find. The drink at the center of her recovery was Rejuvelac. It is made by sprouting whole grains, wheat berries, rye, quinoa, or buckwheat, then soaking those sprouted grains in filtered water for 2 days until natural wild fermentation begins. What results is a liquid that appears unremarkable, slightly cloudy, mildly tart, faintly yeasty. What it contains is considerably less ordinary. The sprouting process activates enzymatic activity inside the grain that breaks down phytic acid, a compound present in all whole grains that binds to minerals like zinc, magnesium, and iron, preventing their absorption. Sprouted and fermented grain delivers its minerals in a form the body can actually use. The fermentation then adds B vitamins in bioavailable form, including B12, one of the most commonly deficient nutrients in adults over 60, and one of the most critical for nerve function, cognitive clarity, and sustained energy. B12 deficiency is frequently misattributed to age-related fatigue and mood change when it is in fact a correctable nutritional gap. Rejuvelac is one of the few non-animal sources of naturally occurring B12 compounds, a distinction that researchers studying plant-based fermentation have found worth continued investigation. To make Rejuvelac, soak half a cup of whole wheat berries or quinoa in water for 8 hours. Drain and rinse thoroughly. Place in a wide-mouthed jar covered with cheesecloth. Rinsing the grains twice daily for 2 days, until small white sprouts appear at the grain tips. Transfer sprouted grains to a clean quart jar. Cover with 2 cups of filtered water and leave at room temperature for 48 hours. Strain and refrigerate the liquid. The flavor should be lightly tart with a faint fermented quality. Drink half a cup before meals. The sprouted grains can go through a second fermentation with fresh water before composting. Anne Wigmore's physicians called her recovery unexpected. The drink she centered it on costs less than 50 cents a batch to make at home. That gap between medical expectation and kitchen practice is perhaps the most accurate summary of why these preparations disappeared and why they deserve examination. Number 10. Fermented turmeric drink. Turmeric has a frustration problem that anyone who has taken it seriously eventually encounters. The active compound curcumin is notoriously resistant to absorption. Studies consistently find that the majority of curcumin consumed in capsule or standard powder form passes through the gastrointestinal tract without entering the bloodstream in meaningful concentrations. This is why turmeric supplementation in clinical trials frequently produces results less dramatic than the laboratory evidence for curcumin's properties would predict. The compound is real. The challenge is delivery. Traditional Sri Lankan and South Indian communities solved this problem 1,000 years ago without knowing any of the biochemistry. They fermented fresh turmeric root, grated and packed into clay pots with water and naturally occurring cultures, and consumed the resulting tangy golden drink daily as a remedy for joint discomfort, digestive inflammation, and low immunity. What fermentation accomplishes with turmeric is precisely what those communities had discovered through practice. The process breaks down the root's cellular walls and converts curcumin into metabolite forms, specifically tetrahydrocurcumin, that researchers suggest the body absorbs considerably more efficiently than raw or dried curcumin preparations. One compound pairing that those traditional preparations included without scientific rationale, and that modern research has since confirmed, is black pepper. Piperine, the active compound in black pepper, inhibits the liver enzyme that rapidly metabolizes curcumin out of the bloodstream, extending the window of bioavailability by a factor that researchers have measured at up to 20 times in some preparations. A pinch of black pepper in a fermented turmeric drink is not a folk embellishment. It is a delivery mechanism. To make fermented turmeric, drink grate, or thinly slice 4 ounces of fresh turmeric root and place in a clean glass jar. Add a generous pinch of freshly cracked black pepper and 1 teaspoon of raw honey. Fill with filtered water. Add 2 tablespoons of liquid from an active kombucha batch or fresh liquid kefir as a starter culture. Cover with a breathable cloth and leave at room temperature for 2 to 3 days until slightly tangy. Strain and refrigerate. Drink 1 small glass daily. The color will be a deep amber gold. The flavor earthy and mildly sour. The clay pot of traditional Sri Lankan preparation is historically significant but functionally unnecessary. Any glass jar produces the same fermentation environment. The communities that developed this preparation over centuries did not have curcumin bioavailability studies. They had joints that moved more freely and inflammation that quieted. The research is now examining why. Number 9. Juntea. Most people in the natural health world have heard of kombucha. Very few have encountered its rarer counterpart. Jun tea is made in a similar way. A living culture ferments a sweetened tea base over 1 to 2 weeks, but with one substitution that changes everything about what results. Where kombucha uses black tea and refined cane sugar, Jun uses high-quality green tea and raw honey. That difference is not cosmetic. Green tea contains a class of compounds called catechins, particularly EGCG, Epigallocatechin gallate, that have been studied extensively for their effects on cellular oxidative stress and cognitive function. Research published in journals, including the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, has found that regular green tea catechin consumption is associated with measurable support for memory and processing speed in adults over 60, a population in which cognitive resilience is among the most pressing health priorities. Black tea contains catechins in smaller concentrations and at different ratios, raw honey contributes something that refined sugar never could. Its naturally occurring antimicrobial compounds, hydrogen peroxide, methylglyoxal, and a range of phenolic acids survive partial fermentation and contribute to the microbial environment of the finished jun in ways that cane sugar does not. The specific culture used to ferment jun, distinct from the SCOBY used for kombucha and not interchangeable, produces bacterial strains that researchers studying fermented beverage microbiology have found genuinely different from any other commonly consumed fermented drink. The origin of the jun culture is traced by tradition to Tibetan monastic communities who developed and protected it for centuries. Whether that attribution is fully documentable is debated. What is not debated is that the culture itself is biologically distinct. To make jun tea, obtain a jun culture from a specialty fermentation supplier kombucha. SCOBYs cannot substitute. Brew 2 liters of high-quality green tea, such as a Japanese sencha or a Chinese dragonwell. Allow the tea to cool completely to room temperature. This is not optional. Heat destroys the active compounds in raw honey, so the honey must never be added to warm liquid. Dissolve 1 cup of raw honey into the fully cooled tea. Add the jun culture and 1 cup of starter liquid. Cover with a breathable cloth and ferment at room temperature for 7 to 14 days. The finished jun should be delicate, slightly floral, and pleasantly tart with none of the vinegary sharpness of over-fermented kombucha. Refrigerate when the flavor is right. Jun cultures prefer cooler room temperatures and slightly more careful tending than kombucha. They reward the attention with a drink that is genuinely in its own category. The monks who protected this culture across centuries understood, without laboratory confirmation, that what they were preserving was worth protecting. The research is now beginning to characterize precisely what they knew. Number 8. Water kefir. Water kefir removes every excuse for not consuming living probiotics daily. No dairy. No long fermentation window. No specialized equipment. Water kefir grains, small translucent crystal-like clusters of bacteria and yeast that bear no resemblance to dairy. Kefir grains are added to sugar water, fruit juice, or coconut water, and left to ferment for just 24 to 48 hours. What results is a lightly fizzy, refreshing drink that delivers beneficial bacterial strains entirely different from those found in dairy, kefir, or kombucha. That difference matters more than most people realize. The gut microbiome is not a single ecosystem that benefits uniformly from one type of probiotic input. It is a complex community of several hundred distinct microbial species, and different fermented drinks populate different regions and support different populations within that community. Research from institutions, including the Human Microbiome Project, has established that microbial diversity, the sheer variety of species present, correlates more strongly with resilience and function than the raw count of any single bacterial strain. Water kefir adds categories of microbial diversity that dairy kefir and kombucha are not providing. For anyone over 60 who has taken a course of broad-spectrum antibiotics in recent years, which eliminates large portions of the gut microbiome indiscriminately and often permanently reduces its diversity, water kefir offers one of the gentlest and most practical tools available for beginning to rebuild what was lost. The grains multiply with every batch, meaning one initial purchase of a few dollars produces a perpetual supply at essentially no ongoing cost. To make water kefir, dissolve 3 tablespoons of unrefined cane sugar in 4 cups of filtered water in a clean wide-mouth jar. Add 2 tablespoons of water, kefir grains, cover with a breathable cloth and leave at room temperature for 24 to 48 hours. The finished kefir will be slightly cloudy and faintly fizzy. Strain out the grains and refrigerate the liquid for a second fermentation that adds natural carbonation and depth of flavor. Pour the strained kefir into a sealed bottle with 2 tablespoons of fruit juice and leave at room temperature for another 24 hours before refrigerating. The grains go directly into a new batch of sugar water, 1 batch every 2 days, indefinitely. The generations who consumed fermented drinks daily did not have microbiome sequencing technology. They had the consistent observation that people who stopped drinking living beverages declined in ways that people who didn't were not declining. That observation, it turns out, was tracking something real. If this kind of ancient knowledge resonates with you, take a moment right now to hit like and subscribe, because what's coming next in this countdown goes even deeper into what traditional cultures knew and what modern research is only beginning to confirm. Number 7. Amazake. In Japan, there is a drink so nutritionally complete that traditional healers called it the drip of the gods. The name is amazake, which translates loosely as sweet sake, and it has been made in Japanese kitchens for well over 1,000 years. Consumed at Shinto shrines, offered at winter festivals, and brought specifically to sickbeds across the country. It carried a particular reputation that sets it apart from other traditional drinks in a meaningful way. Physicians in the Edo period did not reach for amazake when patients were merely tired or mildly unwell. They reached for it when a patient was too depleted to eat, when fever had emptied the body's reserves and the digestive system was too exhausted to process solid food. Amazake was the bridge between severe illness and recovery. Picture the scene. A household in 17th century Kyoto, 3 days of high fever. No food kept down. The patient hollow-eyed and barely present in the room. The healer arrives. He does not bring medicine from dried roots or mineral preparations. He brings a warm ceramic cup of something pale and slightly sweet that smells faintly of rice and fermentation. Because he understands, through 100 years of apprenticeship behind him and 100 years of apprentices ahead, that what this body needs is not stimulation. It is nourishment in a form that requires almost no work to receive. That understanding is now explainable in cellular terms. Amazake is made by fermenting cooked, short-grain rice with koji, the natural mold culture Aspergillus oryzae, the same organism used to ferment miso, sake, and soy sauce, which secretes amylase enzymes that break the rice starches entirely down into simple natural sugars and simultaneously releases a dense concentration of B vitamins B1, B2, B6, and folic acid in bioavailable form. The natural sugars produced are glucose and maltose forms of energy. The body can absorb through the intestinal lining almost without digestion, for a person whose digestive system has been stilled by illness. This is cellular rescue through a cup of warm fermented rice. B. Vitamin depletion is one of the most common and least diagnosed contributors to the prolonged fatigue, mental fog, and low mood that many adults over 60 attribute simply to the process of aging. The Edo physician did not know the term B vitamin complex. He knew that the patients who received amazake during fever recovery returned to full function faster than those who did not. He had watched it enough times to trust it without needing a mechanism. To make amazake at home, cook 1 cup of short-grain Japanese rice until very soft and sticky. Cool the rice to exactly 140 degrees Fahrenheit. A probe thermometer is worth using here, because this temperature threshold is not approximate, above 145 degrees. The koji culture begins to denature, and the fermentation will not proceed correctly. Stir half a cup of dried koji rice available from Japanese grocery stores and increasingly from online fermentation suppliers into the cooled rice until fully combined. Place the mixture in a covered container, insulated with a folded towel to maintain warmth, or set it on the lowest possible setting in a slow cooker with the lid ajar. Leave for 6 to 10 hours until the mixture has become noticeably sweet, fragrant, and slightly liquefied. Serve warm as is, or blend smooth and thin with additional warm water to drinking consistency. No sweetener is needed. The koji produces every gram of sweetness through enzymatic activity. Refrigerate for up to 5 days. Rewarming gently before serving. Traditional physicians called it the drink of the gods because they had watched it bring people back from the edge of serious physical depletion. The koji enzymes didn't need a Nobel Prize to do their work. They simply needed a warm jar and a careful hand. Number 6. Traditional ginger beer. The ginger ale sitting in grocery store refrigerators today and traditional ginger beer share a name and almost nothing else. Commercial ginger ale is carbonated water with artificial or concentrated ginger flavoring introduced after the fact. The heat used in manufacturing and the filtration required for shelf stability destroy the vast majority of what makes fresh ginger medically significant. What arrives in the can or bottle is essentially ginger-flavored carbonated water with the active compounds removed. Traditional ginger beer is a living, fermented drink produced using a ginger bug, a culture of wild yeast, and naturally occurring bacteria cultivated from fresh ginger root, water, and a small amount of sugar over 5 to 7 days of daily feeding. The fermentation produces natural carbonation alongside active probiotic cultures while preserving the full potency of ginger's key active compounds. Gingerols in fresh ginger root and shogales formed when gingerols are dried or heated, each with distinct mechanisms of action in the body. Gingerols have been studied extensively for their effects on the prostaglandin pathways that govern inflammatory signaling, with researchers finding results comparable in laboratory settings to non-steroidal anti-inflammatory mechanisms but without the gastrointestinal side effects that make long-term NSAID use problematic for older adults. Shogales produced when the ginger bug is cultivated with dried ginger alongside fresh have been studied for their effects on nausea and on the specific type of gut motility slowdown that becomes more common after 60 as stomach acid production naturally declines. Traditional communities across the Caribbean, West Africa, coastal India, and rural colonial America brewed ginger beer continuously, not seasonally, as both a daily tonic and a remedy for everything from acute digestive upset to joint stiffness after long days of physical labor. Caribbean ginger beer traditions, in particular, preserved preparation details that have never entered mainstream health culture. The addition of a small piece of fresh turmeric root to the ginger bug, which significantly deepens the anti-inflammatory profile of the finished drink without altering its flavor appreciably. To make a ginger bug, combine 1 teaspoon of freshly grated organic ginger with its peel, where many of the wild yeasts concentrate with 1 teaspoon of unrefined sugar in a small jar filled with 2 cups of filtered water. Feed daily with the same amounts for 5 to 7 days, until the mixture is actively bubbling and smells distinctly fermented. Then prepare the drink. Bring 4 cups of water to a boil. Add 3 tablespoons of freshly grated ginger and 3 tablespoons of sugar. Stir until dissolved. Then cool completely to room temperature. Add 3 tablespoons of fresh lemon or lime juice and a 1/4 cup of active ginger bug liquid. Bottle in flip-top glass bottles and leave at room temperature for 2 to 3 days until carbonated, releasing the cap briefly, once daily to prevent excessive pressure. Refrigerate when fizzy. The ginger bug continues, producing indefinitely with daily feeding, essentially giving you unlimited traditional ginger beer for the cost of a little ginger and sugar each week. The communities that brewed this daily were not following a wellness trend. They were following results. The research has simply given those results a vocabulary. Number 5. Fermented elderflower and herb kvass. Bread kvass, the fermented rye drink common across Russia and Eastern Europe, is well documented. What is almost entirely unknown outside of Central European folk herbalism is the parallel tradition of fermenting wild herbs and flowers alongside the grain base to create a therapeutic drink that targeted specific organs rather than providing general gut support. Monastic communities across Poland, the Czech Republic, and Ukraine developed and refined these preparations over centuries, with different herb combinations for different seasonal complaints. The elderflower version, made in late spring, when elder trees bloom, was considered among the most valuable of these preparations. Elderflowers contain rutin, a flavonoid that supports capillary integrity and has been studied for its effects on fluid retention, poor circulation, and the edema that frequently develops in the lower limbs of older adults after prolonged sitting or standing. Elderflowers also contain a class of compounds called triterpenes, specifically ursolic acid and oleanolic acid, that laboratory studies have found significant anti-inflammatory activity in, with particular relevance to the respiratory mucosa. A small amount of dried yarrow Achillea millefolium was traditionally added to elderflower kvass by monastic herbalists for its bitter compounds, which stimulate bile production and liver function through the same hepatic pathway that modern hepatologists recognize as critical to fat-soluble vitamin absorption. To make elderflower kvass, prepare a base of stale rye bread by toasting 2 thick slices until deeply golden. Place in a large jar with a loose handful of fresh or dried elderflowers and a 1/2 teaspoon of dried yarrow if available. Pour 2 liters of filtered water, that has been boiled and cooled to warm not hot over the bread and flours. Add 2 tablespoons of raw honey and 2 tablespoons of fresh lemon juice. Cover with a breathable cloth and ferment at room temperature for 24 to 48 hours until slightly sour, lightly fizzy, and fragrant with flowers. Strain carefully through a fine cloth, pressing the solids. Refrigerate and drink 1 small glass daily. Before noon, the energizing quality of this preparation is significant enough that consuming it in the evening can interfere with sleep. Central European monastery records from the 15th and 16th centuries refer to elderflower kvass as the spring drink, not because it was merely pleasant, but because it was considered essential to rebuilding the body after the nutritional depletion of winter. That framing, it turns out, is physiologically precise. Number 4. Kombucha. Your great-grandparents brewed kombucha on the kitchen counter without calling it anything particularly exotic. They just called it the health drink, or the mushroom tea, or simply what we make. It was only when it disappeared from home kitchens and reappeared on health store shelves at $4 a bottle that it acquired a brand identity. The repackaging obscured something important. This was never a specialty product. It was ordinary household fermentation that families maintained without thinking of it as a practice. Kombucha begins as ordinary sweetened tea. A living culture called a SCOBY, a disc of cellulose produced by symbiotic colonies of bacteria and yeast, is placed into the cooled tea and left to ferment for 1 to 4 weeks. During that process, the culture consumes the sugar and produces organic acids, including glucuronic acid, which the liver uses in a process called glucuronidation to neutralize and prepare fat-soluble toxins for excretion. The liver connection is one that most people overlook entirely when they think about fermented drinks and gut health. After 60, the liver's natural detoxification efficiency declines as a cumulative result of decades of medication processing, environmental exposure, and the gradual reduction in hepatic blood flow that accompanies aging. Glucuronic acid support becomes specifically more relevant precisely at the age when most people begin looking for answers to fatigue, skin changes, and the general sense that recovery from anything takes longer than it once did. Traditional communities across Russia, China, and Germany brewed kombucha continuously for generations. Russian households in particular kept a SCOBY going the way a family today might keep a sourdough starter, observing benefits that researchers are now characterizing at the molecular level. The commercial versions sold in health stores are real kombucha in the technical sense. The live culture counts after pasteurization and shelf stabilization, however, are significantly lower than freshly brewed homemade kombucha. A bottle that has been on a refrigerated shelf for 3 weeks contains a fraction of the living cultures present in a freshly bottled home batch. The difference is meaningful. To make kombucha brew, 2 liters of black or green tea. Add 1 cup of cane sugar and stir until fully dissolved. Cool to room temperature, completely. This step cannot be rushed. Pour into a glass jar. Add a SCOBY and 1 cup of starter liquid from a previous batch or from a bottle of raw, unflavored, store-bought kombucha. Cover with a breathable cloth and leave at room temperature between 70 and 78 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 to 14 days. Tasting from day 7 onward. When the flavor is pleasantly tart with balanced sweetness, bottle and refrigerate. SCOBYs are available online for a few dollars and last indefinitely with proper care. One initial purchase, unlimited kombucha for the rest of your life. The Russian household that kept a SCOBY alive through 2 world wars and 3 generations of political upheaval was preserving something they had learned not to lose. The research has simply now found the vocabulary to explain why. Number 3. Switchel. Switchel helped fuel generations of American farmers. During the colonial and frontier periods, workers spent long summer days laboring in intense heat and often carried switchel in clay or tin jugs. The basic recipe remained almost unchanged for generations because it was simple and effective apple cider vinegar, ginger, blackstrap molasses, or raw honey, and water. The combination provides several nutrients and compounds that can support the body's needs after physical exertion. Apple cider vinegar contains acetic acid, while blackstrap molasses is particularly rich in minerals such as magnesium. 1 tablespoon provides roughly 40 milligrams of magnesium. This mineral plays important roles in muscle function, normal heart rhythm, blood pressure regulation, and sleep. For people performing strenuous physical work in hot weather, replacing minerals lost through sweating was especially important. Ginger adds another useful component. Its gingerol compounds have anti-inflammatory properties and may help with the muscle stiffness and soreness that can follow demanding physical activity. Long before farmers understood inflammation at the molecular level, they had already noticed that traditional drinks like switchel helped them get through exhausting days of harvesting and farm work. Switchel gradually disappeared from American kitchens as commercial sports drinks became popular in the mid-20th century. The difference between the two is significant. Many commercial sports drinks are primarily formulated around water, sodium, potassium, sugar, and flavoring. Traditional switchel, meanwhile, combines minerals from blackstrap molasses with ginger and apple cider vinegar, while also providing nutrients such as iron and calcium. To make it, combine 2 tablespoons of raw apple cider vinegar, preferably one containing the mother, with 1 tablespoon of blackstrap molasses and 1 teaspoon of freshly grated ginger. You can substitute about half a teaspoon of dried ginger. Add an optional pinch of sea salt, then mix everything into 2 cups of cold water and stir thoroughly. Refrigerate any unused portion for up to 2 days. If you prefer a sweeter, more traditional flavor, a small amount of raw honey can be added. The entire drink takes about 90 seconds to prepare. There is nothing complicated about it. For generations, working people relied on this simple combination of vinegar, ginger, minerals, and water to get through some of the hardest days of the year. Modern nutrition helps explain why this traditional drink remained so useful for so long. Number 2. Beet kvass. For generations, Eastern European grandmothers kept a jar of beet kvass on the kitchen counter throughout the year. It wasn't treated as a trendy health drink or a special seasonal remedy. It was simply part of everyday kitchen life. Made with just raw beets, sea salt, and filtered water. The mixture fermented for 3 to 5 days, creating a deep ruby-colored drink they reached for when digestion felt sluggish, energy was low, or the body felt unusually heavy. One reason beet kvass has attracted modern interest is its naturally high nitrate content. Beets contain more dietary nitrates than most foods, and the body can convert these compounds into nitric oxide through bacterial activity in the mouth and digestive system. Nitric oxide helps relax and widen blood vessels, supporting circulation and oxygen delivery to the brain, heart, and muscles. Research from the University of Exeter has found that dietary nitrates from beetroot can improve exercise efficiency, allowing the body to perform physical work while using less oxygen. That may be particularly relevant to maintaining physical function as we age. But nitrates are only part of the beet story. Beets are also rich in betalains, the pigments responsible for their striking red and golden colors. These compounds have demonstrated antioxidant and anti-inflammatory activity in laboratory research. In other words, the intense color of beet kvass isn't merely cosmetic. It reflects a concentration of plant compounds with biological activity. Fermentation adds another important layer. During the process, naturally occurring lactobacillus bacteria convert beet sugars into lactic acid. The result is a tart fermented drink that combines beetroot's phytonutrients with live beneficial cultures. Traditional Russian and Ukrainian practices also associated beet kvass with liver support and healthy circulation. Long before modern nutrition research began examining the compounds responsible for these effects, making beet kvass at home is surprisingly simple. Peel and cut 2 medium beets into roughly 1-inch cubes rather than grating them. Since grated beets can ferment too quickly and develop an unpleasantly bitter flavor, put the cubes into a clean quart jar. Add 1 teaspoon of sea salt and cover with filtered water, leaving about an inch of space at the top. Cover the jar with a breathable cloth and let it sit at room temperature for 3 to 5 days. Press the beet pieces beneath the brine once a day so they remain submerged. When the liquid becomes a deep red and develops a pleasantly tart smell and taste without any off odors, strain it and refrigerate. A small glass before meals is enough to start. The beet pieces can even be used for a second fermentation with fresh salt water before being discarded or composted. The entire batch can cost less than $2. Those grandmothers weren't following a health trend or experimenting with complicated recipes. They were simply continuing a kitchen tradition that had produced results they trusted for decades. Today, science is beginning to investigate the very compounds and fermentation process behind a drink they had been making all along. Number 1. Kefir. The mountain communities of the Caucasus region, whose kefir traditions later drew the attention of researchers, including Elie Mechnikov, guarded their kefir grains with extraordinary care. For generations, these grains were treated almost like family inheritance. Communities were sometimes unwilling to trade them, even for valuable material goods. And the grains were passed from one generation to another. Oral traditions described them as a gift from the prophet, reflecting the belief that these living cultures were something precious that had to be protected. Kefir is often compared to yogurt, but traditional kefir is considerably more complex. Yogurt generally relies on a small number of bacterial strains under controlled fermentation, while authentic kefir is produced by fermenting milk with live kefir grains. These grains contain a diverse community of bacteria and yeasts that work together during fermentation. Research into fermented foods has increasingly connected regular consumption with changes in the gut microbiome and reductions in markers associated with systemic inflammation. This matters because chronic, low-grade inflammation is increasingly associated with problems that many people simply attribute to aging, including cardiovascular disease, metabolic dysfunction, cognitive decline, and deterioration of the joints. Kefir also contains a distinctive compound known as kefirin, a polysaccharide produced by certain microorganisms within authentic kefir grains. Researchers have investigated kefirin for potential effects on areas such as blood pressure and cardiovascular health. Importantly, authentic kefirin comes from genuine kefir grain cultures, rather than many commercial powdered starter cultures. But not every product labeled kefir is equal. Sweetened and flavored versions found in supermarkets can contain significant amounts of added sugar, sometimes 15 to 20 grams per serving. Commercial processing and pasteurization can also reduce the number of living microorganisms. In other words, a bottle may still carry the name kefir while offering something very different from the traditional fermented drink that communities protected for centuries. Making authentic kefir at home is surprisingly simple. Add 1 to 2 tablespoons of live kefir grains to about 2 cups of whole milk in a clean glass jar. Cover it with a breathable cloth and leave it at room temperature for roughly 24 hours. Then strain out the grains. Refrigerate the finished kefir, and immediately place the grains into fresh milk for the next batch. A small amount of kefir grains can continue producing batch after batch because the grains grow during fermentation. Once established, the culture can potentially provide a continuing supply and can even be shared with others. The communities that protected these grains were not simply preserving an old superstition, they were preserving a traditional food preparation whose biological complexity is only now being investigated with modern scientific tools. Mechnikov recognized the potential importance of fermented foods more than a century ago, and modern microbiome research is providing new ways to understand why these traditions endured. And this brings us to a larger pattern running through every drink in this countdown. The important compounds and living cultures found in traditional fermented beverages are extremely sensitive to industrial processing. Heat can damage enzymes and other biological components. Filtration can remove living cultures. Pasteurization can reduce or eliminate beneficial microorganisms, while large-scale concentration and reconstitution can alter some of the compounds naturally present in the original preparation. This does not require a conspiracy. It is largely an engineering problem. Living, biologically active beverages are difficult to manufacture, transport, store, and keep stable on a massive commercial scale. The food industry has therefore developed methods that make beverages safer, more consistent, easier to ship, and longer lasting. But those same processes can also change some of the characteristics that made traditional fermented drinks valuable in the first place. So perhaps the more important question is this: how much of what I consume has been optimized for the supply chain, and how much has been optimized for my body? The drinks in this countdown do not require complicated equipment. In many cases, you need little more than a jar, a cloth, a counter, and some patience. Depending on the preparation, fermentation may take anywhere from a couple of days to several weeks. The people who maintained these traditions for generations did not necessarily have more time than we do. They simply understood that certain things could not be rushed without changing the result. If this video changed the way you think about what you drink, share it with someone who might find it useful. Subscribe for more deep dives into traditional preparation methods and the modern science investigating them. And tell us in the comments, which of these 13 drinks would you try first? And what traditional food or drink should we investigate next?